And now we have reached the portion of Ascend Conservatism that we call CFJ's Liberal Education Annex. This is where we try to educate liberals, even though some of them are way too far gone to be reasoned with. But we also try to arm conservatives with actual facts for when they get into a political discussion with someone who likes to regurgitate the left-wing, epically false talking points. Today we'll be talking about the real cause of the Great Recession of 2008. On a personal note, I wrote this piece back in 2009 when I had enough of left-wing talking heads on TV saying, and I quote, "the horrible 8 years of Bush," unquote. So I investigated policies and economic data and wrote, remember January 3rd, 2007. And I'm proud to say that in the run-up to the 2010 midterm elections, remember 2003-07, had made it on almost 900,000 websites. Now I won't say that I single-handedly brought about the tsunami of Republican gains in 2010, but I think it's safe to say it was about 99% the reason.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Well, Mr. Vice President, I think for once you're right. Let's get to who really caused the economy to tank in the summer of 2008. There is one day that you all should remember, January 3rd, 2007. For those who still propagate the fallacy that it's Bush and the GOP's fault, remember the day. That is the day that the Democrats took over the House and the Senate. At the time, the Dow Jones closed at 12,621. Now, the useful idiot that the Democrats like to call their voting base, while vilifying Wall Street for years, tried to claim evidence of Obama's economic success by pointing to a record-setting Dow Jones. Of course, this hypocrisy is lost on the feeble-minded, but it's also important to point out that the current Dow is propped up by the Federal Reserve printing trillions of dollars out of thin air and propping up the stock market in a phony bubble that in the end will only help Obama's 1% donors on Wall Street, but it hurts the ordinary American with inflation as imports are more expensive as well as the gasoline price rises. The GDP for the previous quarter of 2006, before the Democrats took over the purse strings of the budget in 2007, was 3.5%. The unemployment rate the new Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi and new Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid inherited from the GOP was 4.6%. The average price of gas was $2.29. When the Dems took over the budget writing in 2007, George Bush's economic policies set a record of 52 straight months of job creation. I repeat, 52 straight months of constant job growth. Not even FDR, JFK, Ronald Reagan, or Bill Clinton had as many months as W. Not only that, but Bush's policies were reducing the deficit faster than he had promised. Even after the bitchin' and moanin' of the Bush tax cuts exploding the deficit, the budget deficit went from $412 billion in 2004 to $318 billion in 2005. In 2006, it was $248 billion, and in his last budget of 2007, it was $161 billion of deficit. Compare that to the over $1 trillion deficits Obama and the Democrats have been running since 2008. What they don't understand is that Bush reduced the deficit to $160 billion for his last budget because he cut taxes. He cut taxes like Democrat icon John F. Kennedy did, as well as Ronald Reagan. In 2007, the IRS had the highest tax receipts in history. Imagine that, left-wing nutjobs. Bush cut taxes and increased tax revenue. Why? Because the 4.6% unemployment, basically everyone in America who wants a job has a job and is working. It's simple logic. It's better to have more taxpayers than more taxes. So when discussing the Great Recession, remember the day, January 3rd, 2007. It was the day that Barney Frank took over the House Financial Services Committee and Chris, friend of Angelo Dodd, took over the Senate Banking Committee. And the economic meltdown that happened 17 months later was in what part of the economy? Banking and financial services. And the main culprit for this was the subprime mortgage disaster that was entirely of the Democrats' creation. Giving housing loans to people who, in the long run, were bound to default was a terrible idea. But this was generated from a law that Jimmy Carter created, Bill Clinton accelerated in the 90s, and Frank and Dot exacerbated to the tipping point in 2008. The Democrats with the pseudo-government-run mortgage houses Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were forcing banks to make extremely risky loans. So when a liberal tries to tell you it's the banks and Wall Street that are behind the subprime mess, explain to them that if the banks were not forced at gunpoint by Capitol Hill and community agitators like Acorn to make these loans, there would have never been mortgage-backed securities in the market. Period. So thank you, Democrats, for taking us from a true 14,000-point Dow record, 3.5% GDP, and an unbelievably low 4.6 unemployment rate, to the Great Recession that dumped $5 to $6 trillion of toxic loans on the economy from their Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac fiascos. Oh, by the way, Bush asked Congress 17 times to stop Fannie and Freddie. It first started in 2001 because it was, quote-unquote, financially risky for the U.S. economy. But because it was mainly for minorities, the race baiters on Capitol Hill played the race card every single one of the 17 times Bush asked to stop Fannie and Freddie. And by the way, who took the third highest payoff from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? Senator Obama. And who fought against reform of Fannie and Freddie? The hypocrite Senator Obama. And who is continuing the quote-unquote failed policies that got us into this mess by dumping billions more into Fannie and Freddie and not reforming them? The con man in chief, President Barack Obama. So when the Kool-Aid crowd blames Bush and the GOP, remember January 3rd, 2007, the day the Democrats took over. Now, just to finish up the cause of the Great Recession, I have two bookends for you. When Pelosi and Reid took over and inherited 4.6 unemployment in 2007, the first thing they did was raise the minimum wage. Sound familiar? They are trying to do this once again, but this time it's basically pandering for votes for the 2014 midterms. But let's detail what happened in 2007, the last time the Democrats raised the minimum wage. First off, it started the layoffs that set up the economy to be ripe for a recession in 2008, and it was these layoffs in February of 2007 that ended President Bush's unbelievable record of job growth at 52 straight months. Now let's move ahead to another catalyst of the Great Recession and the two things that exacerbated the Dow crash in 2008. In the midst of the fall of the Dow, New York Senator Chuck Schumer spreads a rumor that California bank IndyMac is in financial trouble. He had no business spreading this unsubstantiated rumor, but there was a run on IndyMac, and the huge California bank went belly up, fueling more uncertainty on Wall Street. Schumer and people like Harry Reid saw the Dow crash as an opportunity to make things so economically disastrous that they could blame it on Bush and get the interloper Obama into the White House. Of course, nobody in the media reminded the American public that it was the Democrats who were in charge of the purse strings for almost 2 years at the time of the crash. But the biggest nail in the stock market coffin was the dirtiest of the dirtiest political hacks ever to slither on the floor of the Senate. At the exact point where the Dow was about to freefall or stop its correction from the mortgage bubble, Dirty Harry Reid has a press conference and says that, quote, a major insurance company, one with a name that everyone knows, is on the verge of going bankrupt, unquote. So the next day, every single insurance stock took a nosedive, and the stock market was gone beyond the point of no return by Reid's irresponsible but calculated push. And as Schumer before him, Harry Reid did this only to make things work to better his party's chances in the 2008 election. The Democrats are always politics before country, party before people.